Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History, and this week we're doing a historical review of Braveheart. Now, I know what you're probably thinking straight away, this is just going to be us tearing the movie apart. That's not entirely true. I'd say myself and Michael absolutely love Braveheart. It's one of our favourite films of all time. Sadly, not so much for the historical accuracy. Yeah, we will be tearing the movie apart for that. However, I must note that it is one of my favorite movies of all time, and that's mostly down to because it's a good banter. The memes that are getting out of this movie is a lot. You'll find that there is a lot of amazing memes to do with Scottish history with this movie that I've always loved. And I grew up with this movie. I think I was like 5 years of age when this movie first came out, so I have a lot of nostalgia with this movie. So overall, I absolutely love this movie. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, it's definitely one of my, if not my favorite film of all time. It definitely piqued my interest in Scottish history, and just that kind of
Yeah,
time period altogether. So yes, we know obviously, and we probably will mention before about a lot of inaccuracies in it, but as a gateway to history, I don't see any problem with the artistic license that maybe they took. Um, and I just think whether you're an avid historian or just someone who loves cinematic genius, or just CGI, because at the time a lot of things that were being done in it were sort of
yeah.
ahead of the time frame for it. So I think it encompasses a lot that a lot of people could enjoy without and
Mm.
easily overlook some of the flaws they may perceive that they have. So great
So
film.
without further ado, yeah, let's get this up and going. So I'll pause. Yeah, this is definitely the first major inaccuracy about this movie. Is this movie starts in 1280, and the actual death of the king at the time, King Alexander, doesn't happen until 1286. So it's kind of 6 years earlier. For all the other inaccuracies with this movie, I don't think it's the worst one, but it's kind of just a funny start to the movie. And it pretty much portrays the standard of the rest of the movie, that it's like, it's somewhere in the accuracy realm, but it's not really. It kind of runs off in itself. So it's such a funny start that
Yeah, I think I I agree with you, and the fact that they sort of make out that like at this time as well that Scotland's in this like completely like don't know what to do with ourselves. It was a bit like hard for them because obviously Alexander didn't have like his only
mm,
surviving offspring was Margaret, through the daughter King Eric of Norway. So, um, but they had the Scottish Parliament, and they were sort of they elected it was seven
mm,
guardians to govern the country in the meantime. So there was some sort of like
yeah,
get together and get it to get it organized. I mean, you got to remember, it's very rare that people are caught out on the death of the king. Normally, that this sort of discussion is happening
yeah.
by politicians and nobles and stuff right up until either the king dies by natural causes or
Mm.
they stick a blade in the king. So it's these sort of discussions are happening way before us. So it's a bit, yeah, I agree. It's a bit strange for them to but maybe it just adds to
Mm.
that drama, doesn't it?
I think
Just like,
it's something I could
you
easily
know,
forgive. Is that the movie starts at 1280 when it actually King Alexander dies in 1286. So yeah, it's forgivable enough for entertaining reasons, and just to round it off as well, I guess. And it's nowhere near as bad as the other inaccuracies that I'm going to be getting worked up about later on. Because although I love this movie, there's some inaccuracies in
I
this movie
have,
where it's like, oh my god, what are you on? Like, I can understand this one. This one I can understand, where it's like, oh well, it's close enough, but just other stuff now I'm gonna talk about later on. Stand by. All right, I'm back in. That's another thing. In reality, his dad was Alan Wallace. It wasn't Malcolm Wallace. And to be fair, the movie does say he had his own lands, which pretty much indicates that he was a landlord, a baron, right? Why is it that he is dressed? in just random clothing, and he's just living in a shank. You know, why doesn't he live in a much more bigger castle? Why isn't he dressed up in the noble clothing and stuff? Why is it that the Scottish are seen as like poor peasants of this era? That they're like lesser to the English, when that's not the actual fact. You can see that in another movie, Outlaw King, where everyone's dressed equally. I can never quite understand that about this movie, of why the Scottish have to be portrayed as just backland farmers. Now, in reality, it was Mel Gibson running around trying to pick up whatever clothing it could and just randomly chucked it on them. But the image it gives is just so kind of. It's why I prefer Outlaw King, like, you know?
No, see, this scenario, like, first, obviously, there isn't a lot of information about Alan, and the only thing we really have is a seal, basically, that sort of mentions it. I think it's William Wallace's seal with the bow and arrow, and it mentions like son of Alan. We know that he was obviously of the minor gentry, landed gentry, but I think the problem with this film is this is trying to portray a not so crazy view of the Highlands, and I mean the proper Highlands and the Hebrides, where, and I don't mean the clothing stuff. I mean the lifestyle of being rural, small town farmers and still holding a title within your sort of clan system. And it's trying to get. I think it's trying to portray you much like how Dublin nowadays portrays the Irish, and I think this is trying to portray this almost like Celtic Gaelic hybrid. You know, they are the last sort of descendants of this Highland warrior race, you know, that lived off the land and grubby, and they were just, you know, really in touch with their ancestors. And I think that's where it's trying to. It's that view that Americans, especially back, not so much now, I would say, they're, you know, with the advancements in technology and stuff and portrayal of media, but especially in the 90s, I think it was a very typical view of how the American audience viewed the Scotland and Ireland. You know, the you know, horses and just like vast open spaces with no one around for miles and ripped clothes and just really just, but you know, give this man a sword and he'll cleave you in two, no bar.
Yeah. Go on.
So I just want to go back to the fact that they're having a meeting here. So obviously, given the example that, or given the impression that Alan, or whatever his name is, Malcolm in the film, is obviously a man of standing, and it's a very, you know, it's a very simple view of a clan get together to see what to do next. Bunch of elders sort of getting together.
Assembly.
Yeah. I mean, but then they contradict themselves by saying, what can a bunch of farmers do? And the next thing, you know, Malcolm's pulling out a sword, which swords at that time, you know, were expensive items and weren't just held by anyone. So there's a lot of sort of contradictions in the angle that they're trying to go, which I only think reinforces what I said earlier about, like, it's an idyllic view of some sort of clan system, the Gaelic system, where they think that, you know, it's just everyone had a sword, but really they were only farmers. But like I said, you give them a sword, they'll just cleave you in two, because when you get down to it, underneath that farmer exterior, there's a Highlander, you know, a gallow glass, whatever, any sort of elite soldier you can imagine. And that wouldn't have happened like that. That's you know, there's so many inaccuracies, even just with every nobleman who was willing to fight was at that meeting. And you know, I don't even know if the actual execution like that ever happened. I don't think it did. I don't remember reading ever that he rounded up a load of people in a barn and just sort of like hung them for basically just being a potential threat. It's one
of Edward's, because the problem with this movie is it skips forward. It was exactly what I was meant to be saying at the start with 1280, that this movie kind of skips forward, and it says this is meant to be set in 1280, and it kicks off in 1286, and then the massacres and the murdering of Edward Langshants going into Scotland to try to, put the Scottish under his control, all happens around 1287. So this is meant to be in 1287, after Edward Langshants has gone up to Scotland and killed up to 8,000 to 1,000, tens of thousands of people. But they literally sum it up to, just a bunch of lads are hung in a farm. It's
Yeah,
fun,
and not only that, and even when he says that a bunch of nobles are just hung in a farm, it's they don't just. He would have gone up to try and get rid of rivals and other factions, other clan factions, whether it be the Commons, Leader, or the Bruces, or whatever. There was a lot of infighting in that way. Scottish on Scottish violence was very prevalent in this time.
Well, that's why Edward the Bruce was sent up in the first place. Was to cause John Bailey and Robert the Bruce to put them in line. Then on top of that, it was John Bailey was chosen, and then he was meant to be put under Edward Longshants as part of it, and that's what causes the strife between the various factions. And this is why Robert the Bruce and William Wallace becomes buddy.
Yeah, but that's up to like 1291 is what I'm, so like that's even further. It's like 11 years after the start date of this film's even meant to be started. So what I'm saying is that I don't know of any sort of instance of like especially in that time period, but I don't know of any instances where they just rounded up a bunch of nobles and hung them in a
it's a
barn.
mess. Yeah, it is a mess
because what I'm saying is the pool of nobles in Scotland at that time is very small. It's ran by a very small amount of earls and barons, and when I say very small, I mean in a wider view of the population of the country. So for him to get what was like 30 nobles in there or whatever, and their page boys into a bar, I mean that's literally wiping out a huge chunk of the nobles of Scotland at that time. It's a one or two. We all know that Bruce and Comyn had that scrap in the church, and catching the odd noble here, rogue noble, William Wallace later on. But 30 of them in a bar, it just seems a bit. I'm guessing selling drama, but it's just a bit like. I mean, it just seems a bit even far-fetched, and I think that's one of the things that's just kind of gets me. There's a lot of little bits in here where you can just see they're trying to build up the almost anti-English sentiment in this film by hyping up the tension.
Definitely. It doesn't inspire the SNP for no reason,
Well, this is true.
Yeah. Anyway, and carry on, will we?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, I have to pause it here. Jeez, what year did this say it was set in? Is it still meant to be 1280?
Well, I just think if this is meant to be after the treaty that England had with France in 1295, it misses so many other key points to the build-up of the Scottish War of Independence, with whether that be the Great Cause, 1291 to 1292, or John Balliol being inaugurated as king, recognising Edward as overlord, and even though Edward obviously says he will guarantee Scottish independence. It fails to mention, obviously, when in 1294, where Edward had sort of said to the Scottish nobles, excuse my French, come fight with me in France, and none of them appear. I mean, that's just that's a lot. I mean, I get it. That's if it's 1295 and it started in their storyline at 1280. That's a 15-year sort of. That's a film in itself. But I mean, they could have just like put a couple of scenes in there to tip the hat to it, because it just seems like such a huge jump, and Wallace joins the whole Scottish War of Independence because the English killed his dad 15 years ago, and and really that like nothing else far greater in the whole grand scheme of things in Scotland has happened until this point. It just seems like, and they don't even allude to it later on in the film either. They don't really sort of go, well, all this has kind of happened, which is why we're at the stage we're at now. It just seems to be very like the English, they're just trying to impose their will and overlordship on us. And yes, it's true, Edward was trying to do that, but I just think that it just kind of, it almost is sort of like, oh, look at the Scottish, look at us, we're on the back foot, we're just poor farmers just trying to live the peaceful life, and this powerful superpower next to us is trying to absorb us into their realm. And it wasn't like that at all.
Because Isabella France, she was born in 1295, right? So what, she's like 9 years of age or something in this scene? Because the movie is set in 1280, and you see William Wallace as a boy, like the years and stuff, it just doesn't really add up. But further still, I actually hate Isabella France in this movie. Like, I actually can't stand her in this movie. For me, I think it just ruins the movie, because William Wallace is meant to be getting revenge for the murder of his wife, and then halfway in he just wants to go off with Isabella France. And it's like, why do you want to go off with Isabella France for? You're meant to be getting revenge for your dead wife. It's weird for me. It just feels so weird. And then the whole relationship between Isabella France, the she-wolf of France, and Willie Wallace, it just feels weird for me. Even more so when this film, it depicts, don't get me wrong, a noble William Wallace, but like as a peasant farmer, because that's the way he's dressed, going off with a rich noble Isabella France. It really configures my brain. My brain just doesn't make any sense. Further still, when Isabella France, didn't she go off with Stephen? It just configures my brain so much, and I just don't like her in this movie. It ruins the rage that William Wallace is, especially at the last scene where you see the ghost of William Wallace's wife, and it just feels stained when the fact he just went off with Isabella France. It feels so weird for me.
From my point of view, they should have really focused more on the film's very obviously idealistic in nationalism in a lot of ways anyway, and they really could have got a lot more from it if they'd made William Wallace's, overlooking obviously the time period and how brutal it actually was, but making William Wallace's next love Scotland, that his country was his next love, kind of, and that's where his driving force was, not just a pretty French woman, just like, I love Scotland, and it's like, but I like girls in frilly clothes also.
This scene annoys me so much. The just promo noctus ceramist, whatever they want to call it, because it's complete folklore made up anyway. And I understand where they're coming from. Like, in this movie, it's described as a contract where the English noble is allowed to take one of the brides from a Scottish family and then have his way with her, and then she has an English child, right? And it's their way of breeding out the Scottish, when in reality, what was going on was that you had Englishmen, and this didn't just happen in Scotland as well, it happened in Ireland, a lot in Ireland in fact. So I don't mind it being somewhat in the movie in a kind of PC, maybe playful way, in a where, not sure if that's the right word to say, but regardless, sort of version of this horrible act did happen in Ireland and Scotland, where English nobles wanted to undermine Scottish and Irish nobles by going into their territory and physically taking their women, having their way with their women, and then sending them back as a kind of, you're not much of a great lord, are you, because you can't even protect your own women folk. And this happened all the way up to the 1700s, where you had English nobles going into Irish territory, taking their women, physically having their way with them, and sending them back on purpose as a kind of, kind of undermining the manhood of the Irish nobles, Irish and Scottish nobles, that they can't even protect their own women folk from these barbarous English, you know. So it annoys me the fact, to me, it's not too bad having this law in this because it kind of represents that in a way. But what annoys me about it is the fact he doesn't protect his woman. You know, that would have never happened in this period because it's the medieval period. It's the period where men are supposed to be men, you know. They're supposed to be acting first, think later. They're meant to be literally living by the sword and dying by the sword. Why is he just allowing his woman to be given away when that would have never happened in a million years, especially in Gaelic Scotland and Ireland? It just wouldn't have happened. And I know this is the Normans, more of Norman Scotland, which does confuse me more to the clothing and stuff from a historical point of view. But regardless, if it's a Norman or a Gaelic, both a Norman and a Gaelic would have never had this happen. You know, they would have done everything in their power to make sure another man would have not taken their woman away from them. You know, it just completely undermines their manhood. So it makes the scene itself that the Englishman wants to undermine a Scottish man's manhood, that makes sense. But the fact he's allowing his own manhood to be undermined makes no sense. They even have a word for that called cockold, which comes from the medieval period. Because don't get me wrong, you do have nobles in France and Scotland and Ireland that just allow their women folk to be taken and for Englishmen to have their way with them. And they're just referred to as cockholds. You know, it's the most undermining thing that could happen. So this scene annoys me so much that he's allowing some other man to make a cockhold of him. You know, it just annoys me, man. You know.
Yeah, I think the fact that later on, when Moran, the woman love interest of William Wallace in this film, is attacked by an English soldier, much but in the same way, where William would go and straight in. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't use the defence that these are armed men here. Never mind that this group of people come into a clan setting with this intent. Yeah. This just would never have happened. To come into this sort of setting, uninvited, not part of the ceremony, and to take a woman in front of the entire clan, because this isn't just an insult to the man. This is an insult to the entire. This is an insult to the whoever would be the leader of this, because ignoring the Baron being in charge, the hierarchical system still lives on underneath him. Yeah. They just sort of integrated into, sort of ruled over as taxmen more than anything. So this wouldn't have happened, like say, just in this setting. But William Wallace goes and defends his wife against an armed soldier in a heavily garrisoned town. So it can't be seen as like oh, they didn't do anything because there was armed soldiers there.
And that scene, don't get me wrong, I like that scene so much. Like, it's one of my favourite scenes in there where William Wallace protects his wife. Now, it's very sad in the person that she's get killed, but it reflects medieval society. And it's the complete opposite to this scene. This scene makes no sense. It just, a man in that period would have died. He would have literally rather die on there and then than to be referred to as cockle. It makes no sense. You know. Anyway, move on, shall we?
Yeah.
No, I do love this wedding scene so much. But even the kind of the classic kind of Gaelic look to it, you know, it's just an amazing scene. And later on, then when he's taking revenge, it makes so much sense. And that's why I don't like Isabella France in this movie, not only because she's meant to be a tiny little child at the time, but it just undermines this scene itself, that he loves her so much and they have this beautiful romantic classic kind of Celtic Gaelic marriage next to a beautiful Gaelic cross. And then later on when she gets killed, it really does enrage you. And then you have Isabella France, who just like seduces him, and it's like, what's really the purpose of you committing all the murder and genocide, Wallace? Like, what's going on here, man? It just, for me, it just undermines it. I just don't like it.
Okay, I'm about 3 seconds behind
you. The music
is
so good in this movie. Like, it fits the tone so well that I like, this is the thing, like the purpose, the actual um, point of this movie, the way that the English have undermined our women folk,
But like,
it's so strong in this movie, and it's really highlighted with the way the music is played. But I think the way the historical inaccuracy is done in this, it kind of undermines its own thing. You know, the way they added Isabella France and they add that stupid law. It's just, it's two things that are just stupid in this movie, and it's historically inaccurate.
that's what I'm saying. It's like the whole clan is just sitting there looking like
So when people say, "Oh, they
not
add
a
historical inaccuracy to make
chance.
things more entertaining," I don't think that's the case at all. I think, especially in this movie, I think it
Look.
actually undermines the actual
No.
movie itself. Like, the reason why I don't like this scene is because Robert Bruce's father has leprosy. It's like, why does he have leprosy? Because it's the medieval era. But he didn't have leprosy. Well, he has leprosy now because it's the medieval era. I actually love Stephen in this so much. And his outfit isn't the worst. It's not the best. It's kind of like ragged, tagged. I don't know what the hell it's meant to be. I think it's meant to be like a Cornish outfit with leather top for some reason. But I like the fact that he got somewhat of a Lena there. Somewhat. It's just, it's strange. It's really weird in a way. But he's as an Irishman, he's the reason why I watched this film. You know, because he has so many even right now, the internet is full of so many memes from, like, you know, and he pretty much represents, Stephen the Mad represents the O'Neills in a way in this movie. He's pretty much what the O'Neills should be in this movie, or at least a representative from the O'Neills. He should have yeah, he should have been called Stephen O'Neill instead of Stephen the Mad. But you know, it is what it is, and it's just an amazing movie because he's in it. So the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Yeah, it's something that's just magical for me. Being a 5 year, the moment I watch it, I'm teleported to being 5 years of age again, watching it with my parents, and just the level of violence that suddenly hit me as a child, and it's so strange to be saying, oh well, I'm 32 years of age, and there's just, as an adult, I'm just transported back to kind of more of an innocent kind of view of this kind of boys would be boys that's really lacking and unacceptable from a modern perspective now. Because we have to have a very kind of PC society. Like, this film couldn't be filmed the way it was back then now, because people would be so offended by this movie for the level of violence, although it is so true and gritty, you know. And it's a lot of historians seem to ignore what's the positive of this movie and how accurate it is how accurate the actual violence. And yeah, I know the tactics are completely wrong. It's supposed to be shield wall on shield wall, and then with cavalry trying to flank over and smash the sides, and archers trying to get in between the gaps. But, and yeah, it's a complete dueling free for all. However, the level of violence is so true. Like, even that part you were saying about that guy crawling, over, it was myself who was crawling up to him with missing one leg. Like, that's just so real. The blood and the violence from 1995 perspective, it's real. It's proper gritty violence, and yeah, it's even worse in reality, because you would have had people literally just crying out for their mothers, their insides coming out of their rear end, just complete, and obviously the big massive wall of dead bodies, you know. And yeah, that's probably one of the positives. Of course, you have your negative sides, which is the kit. We were saying a few times, all right, the kit is just absolutely diabolical in this movie. It's just a complete free for all, which, don't get me wrong, it also feeds into the banter of the movie as well, because it's literally Mel Gibson running around trying to get whatever he wanted, whatever he could, put it together for a movie. Like, they're supposed to be, the English are supposed to be in riveted mail. The Scots are also supposed to be, technically speaking, in riveted mail and gambeson as well. And you don't see that. The Scots have little to no armor. They have little pieces of leather, which is completely inaccurate for the period. They're supposed to be in riveted mail or gambeson. And the English in return are also supposed to be in riveted mail and gambeson. Their kit, believe it or not, is meant to be similar. The armor is meant to be very similar to each other, which is riveted mail and gambeson. You don't see any of that. Instead, the Scots are in no armor to, if they're lucky, at pieces of leather. And the English are, don't get me wrong, you have a very, very few people that have riveted mail, but the rest of them have these weird checker stuff that's meant to represent riveted mail. And that's even the start of it. Weaponry rise, God, the weapons really are a free for all. People are lucky just to have a sword, and then on top of that, they just have random pieces. And I know the argument is, oh, well, they're meant to be serfs, peasants, but that they're peasants or serfs who were investing into something that will save their life. So they will get, was it spears, and they will get shields to defend themselves, and then in the evening practice whatever time they could to work is a shield wall together, because they are fighting for their lives. Now, of course, the nobles are still far better than them, because not only did the nobles get to practice from the morning to the evening, and also start their martial art training from the age of 7, they also have experience from their elders, who also would be in the battle behind them, cheering them on and telling them specifically what to do. Okay, move well, not in a nice friendly way. They would have done it very aggressively. If they were messing up, they would have literally grabbed them and shook them and saying, look, get a grip, or you're not just going to get yourself killed, you're going to get also killed as well. So it wouldn't have been nicey, but they would still have somebody behind them telling them what to exactly do, someone with experience, which the peasants, the serfs, most likely didn't have. They didn't have that wealth of experience behind them. They wouldn't have had the same martial art training. They would have literally just had a tiny bit of training in the evenings, and that's if they had a bit of free time. But my point here is that it's far more organised than what you see in this battle. This battle is a complete free-for-all, and that's even ignoring the Pictish paint, which is so famous within this movie. But the Pictish paint comes from the ancient eras. It doesn't come from the medieval period at all. But yeah, that's my main criticism. Other than that, from a banter point of view, and a child, being a kid again, this really does teleport me back. Also, one last thing, the actual battle itself was far better as well. In the battle itself, William Wallace actually and his buddy, Moray's, isn't it? Andrew de Moray, actually surround the English in this battle at the bridge. Obviously, it's the Battle of Stirling Bridge. It's not the Battle of Stirling. So there is a bridge. The English assumed that the Scots would be chivalrous and let them fully across. That's not the case. They cross a little bit, then the Scots surround them. They go in and start choking them. They go in, but just completely surround the English and start butchering them as they're trying to cross over the bridge. They butcher and kill. A load of English are just butchered in that battle. The Scots really just don't take any prisoners in that battle. Then afterwards, William Wallace gets one of the main commanders of the battle, skins his back, and then makes his skin leather into a belt, and then wears the belt afterwards, properly taking revenge for his dead wife, allegedly, according to folklore and then later 1400 literature. So it is what it is, and it's even better. And I think they could have actually added that scene in. Maybe not so much turning his skin into leather, but him butchering the main commander, because it was proper revenge for the subduing and murder of his wife.
Yeah, I mean, my issue obviously is the lack of representation of Andrew de Moray in this battle. He was, well, for a start, he came from a far more powerful family than Wallace. The de Morays, who would eventually become a Moray branch, they owned lands in northern Scotland and southern Scotland, Liddesdale, and Lincolnshire in England. They were really well connected baronial family, and so not only that, he, with his family connections and stuff like that, he was a justiciar in Scotland, and he would have been really the Mel Gibson is to this movie. The Andrew Moray would have been the same sort of example to the actual Battle of Stirling, or just the initial campaign of the Scottish War of Independence. I think it's due to his death or from wounds from this battle is probably why he gets sort of left out, because he's then overshadowed by William Wallace and his further accomplishments. But I mean, even the broader picture of that, I mean, they leave a siege of Dundee to go to this battle, and they leave a part of an army to sort of deal with that. I mean, that's not even represented in the battle. So you get this feeling that it's just some rabble that turns up to the field on the day from the film, or the Highlanders have answered the call, and they've all just amalgamated. But there's such a larger campaign going on at the time here. You know, it's part of a wider war that is just totally misrepresented with this.
It was a complete Scottish War of Independence, but the thing is that people do romanticize it to the fact that it was Scotland versus England, and you get that feel with that opening battle, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, that it was just the various war bands have risen up in unification against the English, when that's not the case. In fact, they're still divided into, as you were saying there, 3 factions, and the Scottish are still fighting amongst each other in a way against the English. And you even get that as far as when Robert the Bruce returns from Ireland. First thing he does is goes into Scottish territory and starts burning out the nobles that had disagreed with him in the first place, and actually leaves, because he burns their farmlands. They have no food, and they actually end up starving to death in their own land. And it's not just the nobles who end up starving to death; the peasantry, the serfs, who had nothing to do with this war, starved to death in the land as well. And it's completely unacceptable in that period.
Well, that's one of the things that at the time. There's only like 2 boroughs that are like Berwick, and another one that are considered to be safe, that have some sort of structure in place, like sheriffs and stuff, to administer Scotland, and so it just shows how much in turmoil the region was, the country was, even at the time, that no one was really controlling anywhere for too long before it was falling back, before allegiances changed, before and we've talked about this on many things before, especially in the border regions around Lothian, where they would swap back and forth, because it was just who was going to protect them at that time. It was nothing to do with nationalism and the fact they were like, we're Scottish, we're English. It was who's nearby, and if one of you decide to come in here and raid it, because let's face it, an army comes marching through, it's never a good thing for anyone, because they're taking everything, and if you're on the wrong side, they're burning it, if you're on the right side, they're taking it all because you're helping the cause, and so you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So you want some army or military or police force who's going to protect you, and you side with the side that's going to provide that. And at various times, obviously, the English and the Scottish could provide that for areas like Lothian, which is why it's so flippant during the Scottish Wars of Independence as the battle line, as the front lines move. It's a really, really just, there's such a bigger picture that I know is hard to convey into a, well, I was going to say short film, but this is the end of the 3-hour film. It's not the 90-minute films we get nowadays, but there's just a lot of things that I think we've talked about during the watching of this film that they could have cut out or just trimmed down, and they could have put a bigger picture on, because I think that, like I say, portraying Scotland as this backwater, back against the wall rabble that somehow managed to defeat the superpower really doesn't do justice to the Scots at the time. Would be my 50p piece on that.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Like, they do kind of slightly cover it, but the film never really gets into that, because the film is more like the Scots rising up for nationalism. They never really covered the actual medieval feudalist point of view of this is 3 factions, in particular 2 factions between Robert Bruce and John Bailey. Instead, it's, there's a reason why this movie really inspires the SNP,
Yeah, no, same with you, there's so many points in that film that could be taken out, that could really bring the story together a lot better, and without diverging so far into the land of absolute complete fantasy. Regardless of what I would consider minor sort of infractions on history, and and to things like clothing and stuff and tactics and stuff, most people can get away. You get artistic license for both those for the most part to the casual watch.
Oh, you see, this is what I kind of like about the movie is that it literally just justifies genocide and murder, and I don't. You see, it's accurate. That's pretty much what they would have done. They would have justified it. And William Wallace is winning his justification because early on it justified it by saying, look, the English have forced themselves onto Scottish women. So it's okay for the Scots to kind of get their own back because that's God's will. And they've also just won the Battle of Stirling Bridge. And okay, William Wallace didn't actually go down to York and siege York. In reality, he just went around the borders. But you get that kind of spirit and the soul of it. It's just the movie really does edit that. It leaves out the fact he goes in and genocides as many English people as possible. In particular, innocent serfs that get murdered and kidnapped, and Scotsmen force themselves amongst them. But you know, it's very justified in this movie. But the spirit is there, man. And I think, like, for me personally, it really gets ruined when Isabella France gets introduced later on in the movie as William Wallace's lover. It's like, are you just a psycho, William? You know, were you just okay? In reality, he probably was just a full-on psychopath, but at least he had justification. Yeah, I think in reality, though, one of the theories, because him getting married and stuff, that only gets highlighted in the literature in the 1400s, and then it's kind of like a folklore story in the background. But at the time, I think it was a dispute over land that causes William Wallace to rebel, and which then he goes off and commits all these genocides and murders. So in reality, he probably was just a full-on psychopath, you know, because there's, you know, land, going from getting your land back to then going off to the edges of north of England and then committing massive amount of genocide. It's like, that's a bit much there, Wallace. Just send in the Irish. I love how that should just become an endless meme at this point. Like, yeah, like it's got a slight indication of Lena, but it really is a far cry from what it should be like. But at least the idea is there. It's the same thing with the kilts. You know, we didn't have kilts at that period, but you do have tartan. So, and you do have, you see, it's cloaks, but the cloaks are being wrapped away around in different ways to keep them warm. And eventually that becomes the kilt. So the ideas are there, but it's very kind of funny the way it's put together. Because you can imagine the O'Neills, and because that would have happened. Like if you put the O'Neills up against William Wallace, they would have joined the sides because the O'Neills, the Bruces, and William Wallace were kind of having this weird kind of pact at the time. But I don't think the movie explains the relationship the O'Neills in. In fact, it doesn't even mention the O'Neills. So I'm just nodding my head like this scene is so stupid. It's just a stupid scene. It's just just nodding my head. It's just like like why did Mel Gibson put that in? Like why did he just? What was the? And I can't even see the justification of that within the making of the movie. Like maybe someone else can comment below and say why this was added in, but I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. Everyone finds this scene very bizarre because Mel Gibson would go on to make Passion of Christ, and Passion of Christ was a true bloodfest of a very violent movie. Now it's very accurate to what people would have gotten in the ancient Roman world of being crucified. But this scene is so PC compared to what actually happened to William Wallace. I'm sure at the start, before he even went there, he was dragged across the streets of London, and then when he finally got there, he was obviously hung off the gallows. He was cut down. On the day, the executioner was so good at his job that when he cut out the heart of William Wallace's eyes were rolling around the back of his head and his heart was still pumping, and the crowd just looked at it in complete shock and awe. And it just highlighted how well disciplined and trained not only the executioner was, but it wasn't even the first time the executioner had dished out the execution of being hung, drawn, and quartered. And in fact, Edward I's favourite execution was to have someone hung drawn and quartered. He did the same thing to the Welsh before the Scottish War of Independence. So his executioners and himself and the English crowd would have been well used to this insane high level of violence that would have been conducted at the time. So a lot of people who review this movie do find it very strange that this movie is very held back with a level of violence at this last bit, especially when you had a scene way before then, the actual battle scene, which is very violent, you know, even to a point where you have someone's leg cut off and he's literally crawling across the ground, to having this where he's slightly hung, then he's put across the bench where his insides are slightly cut out, and he just screams freedom and his head is cut off, and that's the end of it, compared to reality where he was quite literally dragged across the streets of London, hung, his insides cut out, put out in front of him, his heart is cut out while still beating, chucked onto a fire, and then eventually he's cut down, his arms and ligaments would have been cut out while he was still bleeding out, and then eventually his head would have been cut off and sent off to the London. Like it's the complete reverse. And it's very strange because normally Mel Gibson loves his blood and guts in a movie, and he would have gotten away with it in this period, and the fact he's already been showing a whole load of high level of violence before that. I do like the scene though. Like, even if it's a bit like timid down, I do like the part where he just looks over and his wife is there, and it's like, that's why you commit mass genocide. Because of the English. If the English just left you and your wife alone, you wouldn't have killed all those people. And it's kind of bizarre when you say it out loud, but you know, it is what it is. Yeah, like, it makes no sense for them screaming mercy, because he literally went into England. Don't get me wrong, it was the north of England, so it wouldn't have been the south of England. The South English people wouldn't have been so PC in a way, I guess. I don't know, but still, he went into the north of England and he committed massive genocide, and now those same English people are allegedly screaming mercy. It's like, no, that wouldn't have happened. They would have screamed for more violence because this dirty Scot went into their territory and murdered and forced his way on a whole load of poor innocent English women. So that English crowd would have been demanding even more blood against them. Now, I love this scene where you can see her cutting across. I love that because it literally justifies why he did it. So to be honest with you, I would have had the crowd demanding more blood and then having her walk across. But then, like, maybe I'm just an evil medievalist historian. Because like that scene is so amazing. Because it literally sums up, why did I commit that genocide? Oh yeah, because the English went off and forced my wife, you know, to do something she didn't want to do, which caused her to me to defend her, which then in response had her executed, you know. One very funny part of this scene, where at the very end you see the Scots running at the English, and one of the Scots actually has an OBrien Shield. Have you seen that before? Yeah, watch this part. One of the lead Scots running directly at the English has an OBrien coat of arms shield, which, don't get me wrong, it's historical for the period. It's just the wrong group of people. By the way, that sword is also historically inaccurate. That's actually a sword from the 1500s. even for all the mad historical inaccuracy. Directed by Mel Gibson. It was a mad movie. The making of Braveheart, it is 100% worth watching, and it explains why this movie is so mental and so of its time. Like, you will never ever get a movie that's filmed and put together and edited like this, because it's literally Mel Gibson rocked up in Ireland with no real budget because they hadn't gotten through from Hollywood yet, and he was talking to who would become the president of Ireland, Higgins. And the two of them came up with a plan of putting this entire movie together, and it was just a free-for-all mental mess, and you can see it in this movie. There's parts of this movie I really don't like. Like, obviously, I spent the entire movie bitching about Isabel. I don't like the Noctis thing, like whatever that law is. that wrecks my head as well. Yeah, like that made up law just wrecks my head so much because it takes away from the reason why William Wallace. Because like, come off it, you start the movie off by just giving your women away. Why are you so upset? You know, cockholding is just a part of Scottish culture. You know, that's kind of the feeling I felt when I seen that scene. But if you delete that one scene and you highlight the fact that when a Scottish woman is taken, this causes the clans to get enraged, and they spend the more like the reason why they go into the north of England to raid and butcher and murder is their justification is you have English men forcing themselves on Scottish women, which causes the clans to go in rage. And although that may not have been the reason why William Wallace had rebelled himself, it most likely was because of lands. You do actually have examples of that happening where English men will go into Scottish and Irish territory, and to undermine the barons and the lords in that area, you would have had the Englishmen forcing themselves on Irish and Scottish women, and therefore men in those territories would have been cuckolded, which would have caused them to rebel because it was you would have been better off dead than being a cuckold. That's the way they would have viewed the world at the time because it's the medieval era. And so the movie makes sense that William Wallace had rebelled because somebody had attempted to cuckold him and then eventually murdered his wife. So that's why I just felt Isabel going off and sleeping with Wallace, it just undermines it for me because it makes it out that he's actually, his justification isn't the fact his manhood was undermined. It's because he was just a psycho, you know? Or maybe he was just a psycho. You do get that feeling, but from the point of view of entertainment and a film, I just think it takes it away. You know?
No, I think we've covered everything. I think just watch the film because you'll enjoy it. You know, if you can just take away the. I don't want to get too gatekeepery over it. You know, like history. So just enjoy the film for. If you can enjoy it for the historicalness, enjoy it for the cinematic genius and acting and everything else. And the music. Yeah.
It's mental.
So.
The whole movie's mental. But it is what it is. Yeah, it is what it is. It is one of my favourite movies of all time. And the reason for it is that the movie now is a giant meme. And I love it for it. It's a giant meme mess. And there's so many amazing historical quotes that I still use today just for the laugh and for the banter. And it is what it is. And that's why it's amazing. So any last notes?
No, but I said
Nice.
since we're on the theme of the Scottish War of Independence, I may have to push out one of the new things that I was looking to add. So that could be keep an eye out, especially after the Outlaw King review for a new maybe William Wallace or Braveheart themed, or even just Scottish War of Independence themed.
Nice. Nice.
Right.
Well, other than that, guys, thanks so much and all the best.